You know that we have some fabulous colleagues around the state. A few of them are on this webinar as well. So Anna and I both are working with the Food and Ag Development Network. There's 12 of us around the state. We do a lot of the same things in each different center. We're often connected to an economic development agency, and we focus on food and ag business development. So connecting food and ag businesses with the resources and the capital or financing they need to succeed. If you happen to be another FADC director on this call, if you wouldn't mind just putting your name in the chat and maybe the counties that you serve so that folks have your contact. And then also, I believe Anna's going to put in the chat the website where you can find a list of all the FADCs. So we're going to dive right into the Local Food Choice Act. So I've done this presentation before, and it's usually an hour and a half. So we are just going to run through it. And again, I have found that many people have specific questions specific to their product or their operation. So we want to make sure that we allow for those at the end. I will be able to be on the call afterwards. So if you have more questions, I can make sure that you get those answered. So real quick, the context for the Local Food Choice Act is you see a binary here of basically we've had 100+ years of food safety legislative evolution. And those food safety laws have evolved to the food system that we have right now, which is basically an industrialized system. So most of the food that Americans eat comes out of what we see here on the left. And we have highly complex laws that match this kind of system and actually an incredibly safe food environment and a food stream. On the same hand, in the past 20 or so years, there's been a recognition that those food safety laws don't match all producers, and more of a recognition of we need some flexibility and some other kind of regulatory options for smaller producers. And so that's a bit of the context. So again, in a nutshell, about 20-ish years ago, we saw the rise of what's called cottage food laws, which basically they allowed for home production of limited food items direct to be sold direct to consumers. And that was kind of the first step in this process. Fast forward another 10 or so years, and we see kind of what's characterized right now as a food freedom movement. So these laws are potentially an expansion, potentially a different kind of flavor. So they're focused on an kind of an anti-regulatory aspect. So more focused on entrepreneurship, less regulation, less licensing. So keep that in mind as we work through some of the specifics of the Local Food Choice Act. So last time I looked, I think there's about 8-ish states that have what's called food freedom laws, Montana being one of them. And I should also just draw your attention to every single state's laws different. So what we talk about here is only pertinent to Montana. So, so one other piece of background is just to make sure that we all understand that basically we have a food regulatory framework that's set up with federal, state, county laws. They all set standards, and for the most part, food items that are raw or unprocessed or quote non-hazardous can be sold. They have channels to be sold direct to consumer. But as soon as you step out of that and you're chopping, cooking, manufacturing, blending, all those things, you step into a world where there's various levels of regulation on those products. You can talk to your local FADCs about all the specifics of those regulations, but I just want to point out that what the Local Food Choice Act did was, it was passed in 2021. It basically made a channel of products that's separate from those other licensing laws. So, but it's not as necessarily straightforward as we might like. So basically, these products are what they're referred to in the law called homemade food. So that's what I'm using in this term in this presentation. But the important thing is to know that they have to be made and sold in compliance with this Local Food Choice Act to be considered exempt from all the other regulations. So it's not just a list of what can be made or sold under this law. It actually is what's being sold, who made it, how you made it, and where you're selling it. So we're going to dive into those. So the first main point is who can sell homemade food. So who can sell food made under this law, under this exemption. And the text of the law says transactions must be between the producer and an informed end consumer. So in thinking about what qualifies as a producer, it's a person who harvests, produces, or prepares a product. So thinking back to like what I said about raw or unprocessed food, an example would be if you are a small vegetable producer, you have the ability to grow products. For instance, basil. You can sell that as a raw, unprocessed vegetable product. Under other established law, as soon as you want to make a value-added product, you don't have the ability to sell that without a license. The Local Food Choice Act, for instance, in a product like pesto, you could manufacture a value-added product and sell it under this law. And in this case, the definition of producer is beyond just the vegetable grower. So like it says, you can harvest, produce, and or prepare. So you could be a small vegetable operation that makes value-added products out of the crops that you grow. You could be an at-home a culinary wizard who goes to the farmer's market and buys basil and garlic and all the items to make pesto. Or you could actually even be a person that goes and buys all those things at the grocery store and makes the product and sells it. So again, you don't have to have any hand in the direct production of the raw ingredients. Anyone can be considered a producer of a value-added product. And then the other thing to clarify is the transaction doesn't have to be particular to you. So it's a reasonable extension of the producer. So if you have multiple employees, if you have family members that work for you, the transaction doesn't have to be between you as the producer and the consumer. It can be a designated agent. Okay. So the second piece is who can buy it. So who can be the consumer. So again, the text of the law says an informed end consumer. So just qualifying there, an end consumer is a person that is intending to purchase the product and consume it themselves. And again, this is for direct to consumer sales. But the piece to clarify is that it does not include any form of resale. So an end consumer, again, is the person that's going to eat it. It's not a person that's going to buy it and then resell it. So the law is pretty clear that includes a long list of restaurants, bars, grocery stores, coffee shops, anybody that's thinking about buying it and then either selling it or serving it to another person is not, it's not an qualifying exemption under this law. So I think some of the areas that trip people up the most are any kind of online market. So if you're selling through a food hub or any kind of place where people are aggregating food products from producers and then reselling it to the consumer, that is considered a wholesale transaction. So you're not eligible to be selling products under the Local Food Choice Act in that setting. The other piece to touch on is what the law clarifies as what informed end consumer means. So just to refer back to the idea that these laws are the character is a food freedom law. So one of the pieces that you will see in this law is that when like for instance, when the cottage food law was passed in a normal setting, often a law is passed and then there's an ARMS process, which is administrative rulemaking process where, so cottage food law was passed and then it delegated the Department of Health and Human Services to do the rulemaking process for the law. The Local Food Choice Act specifically disallows further rulemaking. So this is one of the points that's been tricky for folks in that the only thing we have to go off of is the text of the law. So the DPHHS can't come out and issue clarification on the specifics for what you have to put on as a disclaimer on your products. So what we have is literally, you're required to inform the consumer that your products have not been licensed, permitted, certified, packaged, labeled, or inspected under any official regulation. So it doesn't say that you officially have to include all those words, but it doesn't say any other standard. So the minimum idea is that you should be informing your consumers that your product is not licensed. How you want to do that is up to you. Some people put it on signs on their product. Some people put it on at their market stand. Some people put it on their websites. The only thing I would recommend is that there is a standard by which consumers are looking for basic information. And these are listed, the cottage food label requirements I've included on this slide, and there's a few that are highlighted. So oftentimes consumers are interested in ingredients, allergens, and then the name and address of a manufacturer is included in other food products so that if there's an issue, there can be a rapid response to a foodborne illness. So again, there is no standard by which the law specifies what you have to include other than the text of the law itself. So that's what we're left with. And then just one last piece on the regulatory aspect. So I often let people know that not so much, it's actually, I think it builds important empathy for the regulators. So sanitarians and anybody from DPHHS doesn't have the ability to clarify this. So it is confusing and there is some gray area in this law. And I just remind people that that's the way the law was written and no one has the ability. I mean, the only way to change this law is by legislative action. So just know that when you're talking to your farmers market managers or to your sanitarian. Okay. Where can homemade food be made? So this law was written specifically to allow for people to make food from home and sell it to their neighbors. That was kind of the intention of the law. And it excludes licensed kitchen facilities. So basically, it is intended that you make this food and these food products in your home kitchen, which actually, in a lot of instances, folks are like, but wait, if I have access to a commercial kitchen, like why shouldn't I be able to make these products there? And the idea was, again, like as soon as we start blurring the lines between licensed product and unlicensed product, things get complicated. So the law was written to make the clear distinction between licensed products and unlicensed products. So if you're operating in a licensed commercial kitchen, you're graying the line between anybody that's making licensed food products there and your unlicensed products. So again, these are intended to be made in a home kitchen, your primary residence. It can be leased. It doesn't have to be owned by you. And they are not intended to be made in shared kitchen spaces or licensed kitchens. And I think this is one thing to be aware of as people start to scale. I have encountered many entrepreneurs that get to the point where they might start a business this way, and then they realize, like, I want to grow. I want to ensure that my products have a certain level of safety, and this is kind of a roadblock, which it's potentially a good way to start, but as you start to scale and grow, you often will need to go down the established channels of getting either a retail or wholesale license, regardless. Okay. Where can homemade food be sold? So again, it's important to know that this is only within the boundaries of the state of Montana. So you cannot sell local food choice act items across state lines. You can sell them to a consumer that then transports them across state lines, but you are not allowed to sell directly to a consumer in another state. The next 2 points about property and roadside stands. So this is basically you are allowed to sell from your house, from your ranch, from your office, or you can deliver to or meet a consumer at a designated off-site. So many people do many community delivery points. So you're meeting at a parking lot somewhere and you're transferring your product to your consumer. And those are both allowed. The important thing to note is what's not allowed is setting up a roadside stand to sell without a prior sale agreement, which means you can set up a roadside stand on your property and sell to the public. But what you couldn't do is go set up a roadside stand off your property and sell to sell to people that you have not established as a customer. And then hand delivery is required, which basically just means this is not intended to be mailed. So the intention, like a cottage food law, is that at some point in time, there's an interaction between you and your customer, and that it's not I have a website and a product that I'm selling through the mail. And then we'll talk about it, I believe, in the next slide, but farmers markets and, quote, community events are included in the text of the Local Food Choice Act. So we'll come back to those. But again, to just reinforce and remember where these items can be sold is they cannot be sold as a part of another business. So you can't set up a pop-up shop in a brewery and have the money go to the brewery and then to you. You could potentially have, I've seen pop-up markets happen where several vendors are selling, say, in a parking lot of another business, but that falls under a farmer's market law as opposed to the Local Food Choice Act. Overly briefly as well, sometimes a law will be passed, and in the text of the law, it will clarify conflicts with another law. So this law did also did not do that. So we have a farmers market statute in Montana, and we have the Local Food Choice Act, and they have some incongruencies. So the farmers market statute says that only non-hazardous food items can be sold at markets, and that any consumable food needs to have a temporary food permit. So when the Local Food Choice Act was passed, it includes farmers market as a community event, saying that Local Food Choice Act items can be sold at market. So both laws are in existence, and they cause confusion. In 2023, the last legislature, there was an amendment to the Local Food Choice Act that attempted to clarify some of that confusion. And basically, through that process, it became apparent that most farmers markets are actually a private entity. So they're either a 501c3 or they're run by maybe a charitable organization. And that private entity has the ability to set its own liability standards. So in the event that a market is on public property, it's run by a public agency, it's fairly clear that those Local Food Choice Act items are allowable. In the event when you get to a private market, potentially on private property, that's when that local market can set its own standards. So they can say, we are going to only allow non-hazardous food items, or we are going to require that you have liability insurance. They get to set their own standards on things that are sold at their market. So quite often the market manager and the local sanitarian are fairly clear on the standards for their own markets, and they can be different. Like in Gallatin County, there's markets that do different, that have chosen to do this differently. So I just really encourage you to talk to your market manager and to your local county sanitarian. Okay, so what products? So again, it gets a little murky. So basically, you can make anything that you make and sell, like we've talked about. And there's some including. So including raw milk and poultry from small producers, excluding meat, including all wild game and high-risk foods. So again, the Local Food Choice Act kind of dictates who and how and where things are sold. It doesn't just specify what, except for the exemptions of except all meat. And you can actually do a couple of other items included. So they don't, for instance, the raw milk was passed under this law, even though it's a high-risk food item. So there's not congruency on that piece. But they both are passed under this law. So the thing to remember about raw milk and poultry is that it's specific to small producers. So they both have size limitations. So one, you can't be a licensed dairy. So you can't have a licensed dairy and be like, oh, here's our raw milk production. Same entity, same place, same animals. So it's limited to 5 cows, 10 goats or sheep. And a point to clarify, a raw milk dairy can produce value-added raw dairy items. So if you're the producer, you're the dairy, you can produce yogurt, cheese, cream butter, all that stuff at raw items. But if you want to produce raw value-added items, again, you can't have a transaction upstream of the products. So I can't go out and buy raw milk and make raw yogurt under this law. I can if I'm the dairy producer, because that's my dairy products. You can make pasteurized value-added dairy products as a non-dairy producer. But again, the raw milk exemption, you can sell raw milk or cream. And if you are making value-added products, you need to be the dairy producer. So we can clarify that if that was confusing. And also know that there are some testing and record keeping requirements from the state. And so the other piece is small poultry was included under this. So it's a 1,000-bird exemption. And you have to be slaughtering it on farm. And again, you can't be a licensed poultry producer making other poultry products. And then the point to clarify, it's kind of the same thing as the dairy production. No poultry products, value-added products, can be processed under this law unless you are the poultry producer. So if you want to make chicken soup, anything that includes stock or again, meat is excluded except for this poultry exemption, which does allow an opportunity for poultry producers specifically to make value-added products under this law. Again, only if they are the primary producer of the poultry. Okay, and then real quick, the only other thing that's excluded is high-risk foods. So there's a federal law that designates high-risk food items. And the thing that trips people up in here is acidified or low-acid canned foods, which that's basically pickled or fermented products. The takeaway to remember on this is that shelf-stable, so non-refrigerated pickled products are not allowed under the Local Food Choice Act. If you're making pickles or kraut or kombucha, like those things, and it's refrigerated, that is allowed under this law. But as soon as you sway into the to the shelf stable products, it's considered a high risk product, and then federal law comes into play. So, and then real quickly, the other thing to remember is that this law doesn't change any other jurisdiction or other existing food laws. So we have other food laws that don't allow you to put things that aren't food into food. And then the Department of Revenue has jurisdiction over alcohol, and cannabis and CBD. So you, if you're making a product that the Department of Revenue considers to have too much of an alcohol content to be considered a food and not an alcohol product, this law does not change that at all. Same with CBD. Added CBD is not allowed in Local Food Choice Act items. So in summary, again, you, the producer, selling directly to a consumer, including raw milk, and poultry under 1,000 birds. No meat is allowed. No alcohol, cannabis, anything with other jurisdiction is allowed. It doesn't change any other existing food laws, and it, most importantly, it does not change your liability. So I know I'm like at time, I have like 2 slides. This is an important thing to remember, is that yes, this is an opportunity as long as you manage your liability. So this is my like snapshot of, on the left, you see any other retail establishment or a license, whether it's wholesale, retail, or cottage food, includes these components: a facility inspection, a process review. So how are you making this food item, and some kind of labeling requirements. So just to point out, the Local Food Choice Act doesn't require any of these. So what it does is, in these review processes, it will often bring up either problems with your facility or areas that you need to address to mitigate risk. Without those, the risk and the liability is shifted entirely to you as the producer. So again, you are exempt from licensing, inspection, regulation, but it does not change any piece of the liability for you as a producer. It doesn't change the standard by which foodborne illness is determined, fault or investigation. So DPHHS will still investigate any kind of reports of foodborne illness, and it does not stop an individual from claiming damages in a lawsuit. So takeaway, make sure that you are on top of your food safety practices. I encourage you to investigate food product insurance, and to make sure that you have the proper business entity structure to shield your personal assets. Here's a couple other, these will be in the slides. The Raw Milk Institute is a great resource for low-risk raw milk. And this is a tool that was produced by Arrow to help home producers focus on food safety practices. And you happen to be in Bozeman tomorrow. We have 2 spots left. This is a workshop put on by Mission West and Prospera and the Department of Livestock to clarify some of the requirements for poultry processing under the 1,000 bird exemption. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much, Sam. That was fantastic and a lot of information covered very quickly. We'll now open it up to any questions, but just as a quick reminder, if you are interested in starting your own food company under the Local Food Choice Act, do reach out to your local Food and Ag Development Center. I know we have Ben, Grace, and Shaylee on the call right now, and they'll be able to help guide you through this process, as well as your local sanitarian. So we'll open it up to any questions. Please feel free to unmute yourself and just ask. All right. Perfect. Sam, I think you did too good of a job. There aren't any questions left over. All right, just as a reminder, Sam will be sending out these slides later on this week. We will be uploading a recording of this video and training to the Great Falls Development YouTube channel, and I'll be sending out that link as well. Do keep tuned. Oh, you don't think you can unmute yourself. Thank you. let's fix that. Can we try again?
Awesome, I think it worked.
There we go. Thank you, Grace.
Sam, I have a question. So, I know some people who are operating under the under the Local Food Freedom Act. And maybe they do raw milk, or they are the producer, but they're not there at the farmer's market. Their kids are there selling. Is that okay? Does it have to be the person who produced selling, or can it be their kid's spouse?
No, it can be anyone that I think it's a reasonable designated agent. So, you know, employees would be fine. I think where it really gets, where I think people care is if it's really like someone is selling, another business is selling on your behalf. So, even if it's a business partnership would likely be fine. Again, anything that's going to just appear as though you are selling through another entity is one that you want to be super careful of.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any other questions? Perfect. All right. I would also encourage everyone to get on their local Food and Ag Development Center mailing list. I believe there are going to be future trainings on the Local Food Choice Act with the partnership between the Montana Department of Ag and MSU. So if you're interested in being kept in the loop about those upcoming, hopefully quarterly trainings, please reach out to your local FADC and they'll be able to let you know when those happen. Otherwise, if any additional questions can be directed towards Sam or myself, and if or your local sanitarian. And thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon during your lunchtime.
Thanks, Anna.
All right.